All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Smarter Movements webinar from Physio Ed. I'm Dr. Kathy Doubleday. Also, here is Dr. Kaitlin Ryan. So, Kaitlin, how was your week this week?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
Wisconsin weather, raining here today, and work's not been so bad. Everyone's been nice and flexible with their schedule, so I
Oh,
appreciate it.
good, good.
Yeah.
No, yeah, coming from Wisconsin and she does home health. So she gets to drive in all the weather.
Oh yeah.
And I was telling her my California weather story. And I had to drive from Ojai to Temecula, which usually takes about 3.5 hours. It took 4.5 hours. And there was like some downpours where I could hardly see the lanes in the highway.
Yup.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. Um, but but it was a good weekend once I got there.
Well,
So I
that's
got to
good
see
at
all my
least.
family. We had a
Oh,
baby
nice.
shower.
Who's having a
My
baby?
niece is
Can I
my
ask
niece
that?
is going to have a baby in 2 months. So yeah, we were all excited for her and
Wait.
had, that's always a good, healthy, happy time
Oh
to
yeah.
get together.
Glad you made it
So
safely. Did you want people to put in their questions right
oh,
away?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so if you guys, as we go through here, we are going to be asking you to put in a question about your spine or any movements that are affecting you during your day or things that you have questions about. Any questions about osteoporosis, bone density, movements, falling, anything that you have that's sort of related to the topic, we would love to have your questions. Today, we're going to focus on mostly about our spine, how to protect our spine, how to move in ways that protect our spine. And so put your questions in the Q&A,
Huh? Yep, I'll
or you
monitor
can
that.
use the chat. And I also wanted to bring your attention that we have a couple things for you in the webinar chat. There's a couple links to a couple references that we have put together, which are going to give you some notes on what we are going over today. So it'll be like a little handout that will remind you of the things that you should practice at home so that you can be really good at protecting your spine throughout the day. All right, so again, I'm Dr. Kathy Doubleday. I'm a physical therapist in Ojai, and I work in and own a physical therapy practice where we also have a fitness center for 50 plus clients, and we have a great community that really supports the idea of staying fit and healthy into our seventh, eighth, ninth, and even in our 10th decades. And Dr. Kaitlin Ryan comes from Wisconsin, and she is working in home health. So welcome and good morning, Kaitlin.
Good
And
morning.
so today we're talking about our spines because it is very common when you have bone density problems, and women and men have difficulty with preventing spine fractures. So that's really kind of one of the big things we're looking for today is how do we prevent ourselves from injuring our spine while we move? And what can we do to move in a little bit safer way? And at the same time, we're going to be building our bones by moving in ways that are not um, detrimental to our bones. Fractures to the spine are common in approximately 25% of postmenopausal women, so over 50, have one or more vertebral fractures. So this kind of statistic makes us, raise our eyes and know that we can't just wait till the fracture occurs. We have to try to get the message out to people before that happens because it's just too many people that have this scenario and that you're going through it. And there are so many ways that we can prevent fractures. They are preventable. They are reducible if we learn how to do a few movements that help us protect our spine and exercises that help us strengthen our bones so that the bone isn't as vulnerable. So, Kaitlin, you do experience a lot of the aftermath when people have a fracture. Are there some things that you want to like fill in the gap in this area for us?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're here for the prevention of it. I unfortunately am seeing the aftermath of the fracture. So, in my experience as the home health physical therapist, it is eye-opening to what can happen at a later stage in life. So, I think that's why this is so important for me and why I'm excited about what we're doing here with the Physio Ed is the prevention of these fractures because once it's already happened, it's tough to come back from it, especially from a spine fracture. And the things that you can do to prevent that fracture, it not only helps your quality of life, but it's helping your pocketbook too. Because once you have a fracture, you've often got an ER visit. Sometimes you have a hospitalization. Sometimes you're going to rehab afterwards, and then you're coming home, and it can add up very quickly. So I know that there are some costs where it can be in the, $17,000 to $25,000 range once you have a fracture, just to kind of make up for all of those emergency room and medical needs that you may have. And then with the prevention, if you're saying you're doing your regular screening, you're doing an exercise program, you're using proper equipment either around the house or whatever it is, you can be reducing, and the cost of it is maybe $500 to $1,000 in like a year with the screening and exercise programs and all the training you might be doing. So it's a lot cheaper to be
Yes.
preventing than it is to address a situation afterwards. In addition to the cost, it's our quality of life and our posture and our pain that we could be experiencing afterwards. So I'm really into prevention. This field has opened up my mind to a lot that can go wrong in a person's life and really
Yeah,
affect them
yeah.
later on in life.
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. And, it's not meant to be a scare tactic, but it is a little bit meant to be a motivational tool, right?
Oh yeah.
To like realize, and people know their friends are going through this, their family members are going through it. And we then it becomes, apparent to us that we do need to act to help it not happen to us.
Mhm.
And so that's really good. So we're talking about today, not just how do you move, but like what positions are you staying in all day, right? There's multitude of things that we can do to make a difference. So if we're going to think about now, what is it in the bone that makes it vulnerable, and what areas usually get a problem with fractures? Okay, so we want to sort of just understand the mechanics of how it happens. So I'm going to do a screen share and I'm going to show you a couple um, references that just give us some idea of what we're dealing with. So at first here, we're just going to look at this idea of posture and what we call a neutral spine. So our spine normally has curves. We have a natural curve, a lumbar lordosis, a thoracic kyphosis, and then another cervical lordosis. So lordosis means it bends backward or it's sort of extended, and then kyphosis means a rounding forward. But our neutral spine is when we have our head over our rib cage, over our pelvis, over our feet. So everything is sort of in a good alignment, and our spinal curves are adequate for movement and they help us build security and stability in the spine. But we want to avoid an increased rounding or an increased lordosis. And especially what it does when we round in the thoracic spine is that it pushes our head forward. You can see the head is pushed forward. And so that puts a lot more strain on your back. It makes your heavy head sort of hang forward. And that adds a lot of downward force through the middle of our thoracic spine. So if then we add on to that, and it can also go into our lumbar spine, right? So if we have a lot of increased lordosis or a lot of arching in our low back, we can also be putting pressure on some of our lumbar discs. So it's or vertebrae. It's common for people to get fractures here in this junction around T12 and L1. There's 5 lumbars, and then we go to 12 thoracic spine. And in sort of the lower thoracic spine, you can see there's a lot of slope here. So the slope around the lower thoracic and the upper lumbar spine are the areas that get the most fractures most commonly. They can occur really anywhere in the spine. And when something happens because of like a fall, um, yeah, we can have a fracture, lower in the lumbar spine. But if it's because of sort of our movements and our postures, it's going to be a little bit higher in the lumbar spine and in the lower thoracic spine. Do you have anything to add to that, Kaitlin, in terms of
No,
alignment?
I mean, you nailed it. It's
Okay, all right, good. All right, so let's also now look at the idea of what happens when we have a low bone density. So if we have osteopenia or osteoporosis, especially what we're concerned with, you can see this bone over here, this healthy spine is very solid. It has a very square shape. That's an important thing when you're looking at an x-ray. You'll be able to see that square shape of the vertebrae. When you get osteoporosis, we have less density. We start to have a little bit more pockets, less structural support within the vertebrae. And that makes the vertebrae more vulnerable to forces. Okay, so if the bone is less dense, then the downward pressure right here could cause this to deform. And let me show you what that looks like, just a representation of it. Here it is when there's a downward force or an upward force from the ground, there is a sort of squishing mechanism that happens, and that vertebrae, instead of being nice and square, it gets compressed, it gets angled, and it gets shortened in the front, usually is what it looks like. And what that does is it starts to bend your spine more forward. You can see the arc of this is more forwardly rounded versus the arc of this flat front of the vertebrae here. So this is the front of the vertebrae. This is the back where you feel the spinous process sort of sticking out that you can feel in your back, the center of your back. And so this is where it happens. It's in the front. It's really sort of deep inside your abdominal cavity, your thoracic cavity. It's in the center of us. It's not back here where we touch our vertebrae, but it's in the front of that spine. So it's a few inches deep into our body. And that's also why a big percentage of these kinds of fractures are oftentimes they're not even diagnosed early or when it happens, because people might not even have symptoms. So you may have a fracture that occurs that maybe it's happening slow enough over time, your body is adapting, it's changing the form of that vertebrae, but we actually don't even get symptoms. Sometimes the symptoms are very drastic, very dramatic. People have a hard time moving, rolling to get out of bed, those kinds of things, right? Kaitlin, do you have anything to talk about in terms of fractures that
oh,
you
I
see?
could talk all day about fractures.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you do it night or you set it nicely where there's normal curvatures in our spine. Sometimes that can change with our age, but with the compression fracture, it really can change. And so that's when you can see people who are very hunched over and have lots of other problems because of this fracture that's happened. So because you had a back fracture, maybe you're now lifting your head up in a terrible way to be able to see. And so now you're having neck problems as well. So it's
Yeah.
they can happen all sorts of ways, and we'll go over those, how to try and prevent that as part of daily
Yeah,
activities
so you
later
can
on.
see sort of over time, right? It sort of this is just gradually over time the vertebrae change shape and it will slowly push your body into more rounded position and our head forward. Okay? All right, good. And then so let's now shift. Let's now shift to talking a little bit about um, like that's kind of the relationship what happens when we get osteoporosis postmenopausal our bones start to change, so we want to try to do things to keep that from happening, but we also might just get less flexible, right? We start to that roundedness becomes kind of stuck. We have a hard time coming out of that. So physical therapy and exercises that help to prevent that roundedness are a really important thing to get started as soon as possible. So that's why we like to say, in your 30s and 40s, you need to be aware of it, but by your 50s, you really need to be doing something about it. We need to be talking to our doctor so we know that we're on the proper medications or hormones if we can, and that we are doing enough bone loading that we can help maintain that flexibility. So, doing flexibility exercises and trying to prevent that forward stiffness. The other thing is just how do we move, right? Like making sure that what we lift is not overly heavy for us with our current strength capacity. We also want to like make sure that we bring loads close to us. Um, yeah, and we want to also make sure that we like use our feet, right? Move our feet. We're going to go over some details about this, but when you're moving around, you want to keep your feet moving so that you keep your spine straight instead of twisting and causing a lot of, torsion and compressive loads on our spine. Um, and then also, watching about how we move. If you bend over and then you twist or have a load in your arms, the combination of those two things is what is very common to put a lot of load and pressure onto our vertebral bodies and even our discs, right? So sometimes it's the disc that gives way, but if we have osteoporosis, maybe it's the vertebra that starts to have changes. So when you take two pieces and you put pressure down and then you twist, that also then, because our vertebrae between there, we only have half as much structural support, that downward pressure added with the rotation really puts a lot of extra downward load. So we've taken up all the slack in flexion. So then the next thing we do is a lot more tension and pressure down into the vertebrae. So those sort of mechanics of how the vertebrae move and how much pressure we're getting on our vertebrae changes with the type of movements that we do. So we're going to do, so those are some of the main things we want to try to prevent, right? We want to try to prevent overloading, forward pressure, and added with rotation. Okay, so those are some of the things to keep in mind for proper body mechanics and proper lifting. All right, so let's go to looking at some movements, some key principles or key movements that are to protect our spine. Okay, so we talked about standing postures a little bit already by looking at our picture of the neutral spine. But in sitting, the same kind of thing, right? We want to sit with a taller posture. It's very common that people sit in big recliner chairs where they're very cushy and very rounded, but that is giving a downward force to the vertebrae. So we can think of that rounded curve and how much pressure is pushing down on those vertebrae when we're in that slumped position. So using a pillow or using a good chair that helps you sit up straighter, sitting maybe forward in your chair, getting your feet on the floor. This is where a proper chair makes a huge difference in sitting position. Because if it's too tall for you and your feet are sort of dangling, you're going to have a tendency to sort of find a stable place, which might be down here into a slumped position. So if you can get your feet on the floor and you can sit up taller, then you're going to feel more secure and stable, and you may not feel like you have to slump down. So I always say, like, if you have to sit in something, you can roll up your sweatshirt if you're like on an airplane, or you can get one of those pillows. Like, if you're going to be in a position for a while, you want to feel like your spine is being supported, right? Same thing for standing. You also want to make sure that you're in a neutral position. Um, and sleeping positions are also really important. Kaitlin, do you have some suggestions on like how we can position ourselves for sleeping?
Sure. And I actually just did this with a patient yesterday. They had a laminectomy, so a surgery on their back. And really, after a surgery is the same principles with a fracture. So the big ones are, the acronym is BLT, no bending, no lifting, no twisting. So that's the same thing you talked about. The forward flexion is the bending, lifting is that load. And if we're lifting something up, keeping it close to us. And then the twisting is that rotation that you were talking about. So even just getting in and out of bed, a lot of times people are doing a big flexion or a big bend, or they're doing a big twist. So you want to have that log roll technique where if you had a log for your back and your whole body, you kind of keep everything moving together. Everyone's different with how they prefer to sleep. So sometimes it's hard to know what you're doing, when you're unconscious, basically. But I actually worked with this patient where she was side lying and she wanted to bring her knee up into kind of like a position, almost a fetal position kind of thing with one of her legs. And I said, you know what, that actually is fine because that motion's coming from your hip. It's not really coming from your back to bring that up. Just maybe putting a pillow underneath the knee or between the legs. So then there isn't any of that rotation or that torsion that could be happening, especially for the low back if that top leg is, far out in front. And everybody's different. Some people laying down flat on their back is the way to go. And some people have a little pillow underneath their knees. So whatever is comfortable for them. But, being in the really big fetal position of really hunched over and really balled up, that can be more detrimental. But everyone's a little different. As long as you're not doing some huge twists and, our knees are in our chin, for the most part, everyone can get pretty comfortable maintaining a pretty neutral spine.
Yeah, I think if you start to think about that idea of neutral spine throughout your day, then you can carry that into the sleep position too, because you'll recognize when you're in that rounded posture, and then you can think of it even when you're laying down on your side or on your back. You can sort of like pre-position yourself, and our bodies will start to be better at finding that neutral position. It's just like anything that we practice, we get better at it, we get more familiar with it. The idea and the feeling of where your spine is in a neutral place, it'll feel like comfortable. Instead of that slumped position feeling comfortable, you're going to feel like the neutral feels comfortable. So, same with sleeping. I think that's great. Thank you for adding the pillows between our legs and log roll, and I love the BLT. No BLT when you're in a compromised situation, right? So that means if you have osteoporosis or you've had a fracture before, then you need to be a lot more cautious about these movements. But I think everybody needs to be conscious about the prolonged positions, like whether you have osteoporosis or not. This is like healthy and neutral. People say, why do I have to do this for my rest of my life? I'm like, well, no, I want to do this too. Like everybody needs to do it because we have discs in between those vertebrae. So we're thinking about the bones right now, but the discs also have this same idea. If we're twisting and pressuring and loading our discs, that happens to young people. That happens to 20-year-olds. and even younger sometimes. Like your discs do not like the same things that your vertebra do not like. So you want to make sure that you're in that good alignment and get familiar with it so you can use it in all parts of your day. All right, so movement modifications, that's another thing we're going to look at right now. So we're going to talk about, and I'm going to go to a couple screen shares again. We're going to talk about how do we, let me get the first one set up. So we're going to talk about movements, okay? One of our big movements that we want to be good at is a hip hinge. Okay, so here is a picture of me doing a hip hinge. I'm in a standing position and I'm hinged over at my hips so that my back stays in that neutral spine. Okay, I have a little slight arch in my back and my head is up. My whole spine is still in that same alignment, even though I'm really hinged over. I'm actually ready to get up from a chair or bend over to pick up something. Most of my motion is happening at the hips. So then let's just watch that go up and down a couple times, bending at the hips, learning how to hinge from the hips instead of bending over, keeping my legs straight and just bending over at my spine. I'm learning to stick my bottom out. Okay, it's not ladylike. That's what people say. I have to stick my butt out into, the room or into somebody's, around. Yeah, just it's athletic. It's not ladylike, but it's, oops, sorry. But it's very important for helping you get up and down out of chairs. And I think it's keeping your spine very straight, and that's going to allow you to feel that your posture is really good. So it is ladylike in that way, I think. Keeping a good posture and learning to use your legs and getting strong in your legs. Those are things that we really want to do. Is that good? Do we want to do that again? Or is that good?
Sure. I mean, I think it is funny because I mean, I'm younger than you, but I'm aware of the posture, and so
Yeah.
I'm constantly in different home environments, and people are in different chairs. I'm taking their blood pressure every visit, so it's
Yeah.
just the idea of the awareness throughout your day. And there are times when I'm having to bend over to get into my bag in order to get some tools out, and I set myself up where when I go to stick my butt out, it's not just in front of somebody's face. So I am cognizant of that, of
Yeah.
I'm keeping my good posture, but I'm trying to keep my dignity too and not just stick my butt in somebody's face. But yeah, it is important for really all of the tasks and activities. And I love how you set yourself up for a neutral spine before you do your movement, because it's really about setting yourself up before you even do the action you want to do. That is so more helpful, I think.
Yeah, and here I'm kind of overemphasizing those things for the camera too, but I'm trying to really make sure that as I lean forward right there, that I don't let my head come forward and I don't let my shoulders round to get up. People do that without even really realizing what they're doing, and that is a really common thing. Um, All right, so a boxer stance I don't really have, but Kaitlin, you definitely talk about using a boxer stance a lot when we were talking about our fall risk webinar. So let's go through maybe a couple more of these things that I have for you to look at. Let's do a golfer's reach. So we're looking at reaching down to pick up something from the floor, and I'm holding on with one hand. That's part of the golfer's reach that makes it really work. That back leg is kind of coming up. It can also just stay on the ground, extended back behind you to help take a little bit of stress off of the tightness of the hamstrings and the tension into the low back. So holding on to the chair or the countertop, and that can be used for like reaching into the dishwasher or getting to the cat bowl or um, you know, picking up something from the floor, if you have some place to hold on, that's the really important thing, that you're sort of sensing that you have stability and then you lean over to pick something up. So I can keep my spine straight even though I'm bending like a lot more than I was with just the hip hinge. I'm kind of going a little bit off to the side, but it's still in a straight position. My back is not getting a twist and it's not rounding to get down to the floor. So that freedom of having that leg lift will, or just go back behind you, helps you to stay in a neutral spine. Okay, let's look at the carrying and lifting. So we talked about how do we move with our feet, keep our feet moving so that we avoid the twisting, right? So we don't twist our body, we move our feet. So our pelvis and our shoulders stay together as you rotate from one side to the other. And then you don't get any of that twisting motion. So even if you're going up overhead, you keep your feet apart. That's the boxer stance. So you're kind of strided, one foot in front of the other, separated by a little bit so you feel sturdy and stable. And you can keep your spine neutral. Okay, so these give you some ideas of improving how you move. And I'm going to show you one more so we don't have to come back to this later. We're going to do, how do we do a cough or sneeze? Whoops. So if that was the way that that I used to do it. Now this is the way I do it, right? So I'm staying up nice and tall instead of, let's do it again. And start again. All right. So if I'm in a forward flex position, see how much force goes forward, and you can think about that vertebral body getting pressure on our spine. Instead, if you keep your chest up tall, your head up, when you sneeze, then you don't get that forward force going down through your spine. Yeah, and this really works. I try to think about this all the time because I want to have this be sort of like in my ingrained in my habits, so that if I ever do have lower density, and it just makes my spine feel better when I'm doing it too. All right, I'm going to get out of this share. Yay. I did it. I remembered to turn it off.
You did a good job.
So when you do a cough or sneeze, it's really important to, kind of pre-position. That's the same kind of concept, right? Pre-positioning yourself so that when you do the movement, you're not putting yourself in a vulnerable place. So that's a really important thing too. All right, so we did our pivoting to reach from one side to the other. We did squatting and hip hinging. We did the staggered stance to support our body weight, and hip hinging. Okay, so we did a lot of that. And then we went over the coughing and sneezing. And yeah, so same thing for like, laughing or hiccups or anything that comes automatically, like that. Pre-positioning our body can really prevent you from having that downward force, that quick force. That's one thing about falling that is really challenging, is that when you fall, there are these quick loads that can be, if you hit the ground, that's a quick load right up through your spine. So those things are harder to handle. And, falling in a way that you can roll out of it is much better than landing hard straight down. So all of these forces are how we're going to prevent. So if we just prevent falling, prevent the excessive, repetitive motions to put load on your spine, that's really important. So, Kaitlin, let's go over a few, like maybe specifics on a few areas of our daily life
Sure.
um, that we have.
Yeah,
I was just looking at one of the questions that
yeah,
came
I thought we
in.
could answer that question too as part of this. Do you want to start off
Yeah,
with the question?
let's start with that. Let's
Okay.
start with the question about golf. So, tell me what you think, Kaitlin, on
So yeah,
the
I don't know if
question.
everyone can see the question or not. So
Yeah,
this
let's tell them.
just someone who is saying that their endocrinologist said that golf is good for them, but their PT said absolutely not because they have a fragile lower back. So I'm not sure exactly, what the endocrinologist thought that would golf would be good for, if it's something where it's detrimental for the knees or something like that. But in terms of the back, golf is a heavy, heavy load with that twisting and that rotation. So if there's anything of a susceptibility, any sort of bone changes or structures or any disc issues that could be happening, I'm certainly hesitant, especially for a big drive, that something could go wrong very, very easily, very quickly. It takes a lot of force. There's huge rotations, and you're kind of slamming your bones together when you're doing that rotation. So I'm on board with the PT. I may be biased because I'm a PT, but I think it certainly puts that person at risk. Maybe there's some sort of modifications they can be doing where they aren't having these big, heavy drives, or something like that. But I'd certainly be cautious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something to be aware of. And there are some, I think, equipment changes that can be done. You can start at more forward tees, right? So that your driving distance is not as far, and you might take an extra stroke to get to the same hole. I think there's some ways that you could modify. I do see a lot of gentlemen, they tend to have like a little bit bigger spine. So it could be maybe, if your PT feels that you have a fragile spine or that you feel that that motion is not good for you, if she or he feels that it's not good for you, it could be something that you may have to be very cautious or maybe work up to it. Like do a lot of preparatory exercises, a lot of making sure that you have good hip mobility so that you're not doing your rotation so much through your spine, but you're getting it through your hips and pelvis. So there are some ways to make sort of your stroke more efficient and less impacting on your spine. But I think that that is something that you would have to work together with your physical therapist to analyze the movement and really come up with like what is the best thing for you. The walking is great. The camaraderie of golf is amazing. Like I think it's good to try to participate. You just might participate in slightly different ways. Like if you're maybe doing this smaller stroke, like less longer stroke, it might make a difference. So, good question. Thank you so much for giving us that question. And then, how about another question was about just how to do get into the laundry, like into the washer. Washer and dryer, sometimes it comes up as like a place where they feel vulnerable that you have to reach down into it. Are there some modifications, Kaitlin, that you have come up with for people on doing laundry?
Sure, and it depends on the laundry, right? So sometimes you have the front load, sometimes you have the top load. So it depends on what kind of laundry situation you have, and it depends on how tall you are as well. I have a patient, a lot of times you think that the top load is a better way just because you're not bending over quite so much, but she was a shorter gal. So in order just to get to the bottom of this washing drum to get the very last sock out, she was really forward flexing to get in there. So it's just about whatever, your body is or your setup for your laundry, trying to maintain that neutral spine as best you can. So if you've got the front load, if you can be, in a lunge position where you're really maintaining, or you're not even a golfer's lift to be able to kind of reach in to get something that way, you're just trying to reduce the amount of flexion and the amount of bend and the amount of twisting that you're doing. So sometimes it is just about setting up your laundry or getting the right laundry machine as best you can. Sometimes it's about making smaller loads of laundry so that if you have to move it and it's heavy and wet, that you're not having a large load to be able to lift. And that can be good too for a little bit of conservation. If it's exhausting to do the laundry, doing lighter loads is something we often recommend as well. And making sure that you are doing that hip hinge, that whatever that motion is coming from your hips and it's not coming from the spine to be able to bend down. Whether that's, some people will even make a little step before they get into their top loader, so then they don't have to bend over quite as much. And so they're making an accommodation or a modification that way, trying to use like a reacher or a grabber or some sort of tool to get down in to get the laundry out so you can put it in. I think that's a great option too. But it's all about trying to maintain that neutral spine and modifying however you need to, depending on what your setup is.
Yeah, and the load size for like carrying it into the house or carrying it around the house in a basket that you can kind of keep close to your body, that's also a very important component.
Mhm.
Um, and having a table that you could stand or a countertop to fold laundry is really helpful. Um, versus say sitting or being on the bed or something like that where you're having to like twist over to the side while you're doing it. So be a little cautious about like what positions are you getting yourself into, and is there a way that you can modify? That's what we talked about. The equipment that you have makes a huge difference. And the statistics and the studies show that if you make modifications, it does reduce the risk of detrimental fractures or injuries to your spine. Another one that comes up really regularly is vacuuming. Now, this is with back pain in general, with with osteoporosis and prevention. Vacuuming is one of those things where it's just so repetitive and it's rotational. It can be rotational, I'll say, in your spine. And so it's very much like mopping and sweeping. There's this sort of rotational force that's always there. And so if you can modify that. So there's always a modification. PTs always have a modification for everything. You want to use your legs to do the movement forward and backward, just like we did with getting up or hinging at your hips to pick up something. You want to use your legs to do it. So if you bend your knees and lunge out and push straight forward versus staying still with your feet next to each other and rotating to push that vacuum out. So if you think of being from your legs and pushing forward, next time you vacuum, check that out. You may have someone doing the vacuuming for you because of this issue, because people do, if they have back problems or back, fragility, they will have somebody else do the vacuuming because it is quite a challenging task. A lighter vacuum, can we change the equipment? A lighter vacuum can also be easier to move across the floor. Some of those big, heavy vacuums that have really strong suction can be a lot of force to push and pull. So those are some ways that you can change that. Two more quick places. In the bedroom, changing the sheets, changing the bed. That is another challenging one, right, Kaitlin? That one,
Oh yeah,
getting those corners over the edge.
and I mean, if it's a bunk bed, my stepsons have a bunk bed. It's just the worst. I hate it so
Yeah,
much.
bunk beds are terrible.
Yeah, and I actually worked with a patient who needed to make her bed, and so I helped her out with that. And it's about, I think you always talk about the diagonal corners, right? So you have one corner and then you go to the diagonal. That way there isn't so much pulling and tugging and folding, I guess, underneath there too. Having lighter bedding can be super helpful just from that lifting and the amount of lift. If it's a lighter that bedding, then you don't have to do quite as much pulling and it's not quite as taxing on your back for the muscles or for the bones that way. So getting into maybe a golfer's lift, if you have a lower mattress, to be able to do that when you do your tucking or you're squatting down to do that, just anything to prevent the reaching. even having remotes on your bedding. I had a patient just yesterday, had the spine surgery, and she was bending over to get the remote on the bed. And, I was like, ooh, you want to prevent that. So either it's using the reach, or she even just brought over her bedspread that way. That was just easier, just to bring it on in and use it that way. So there's lots of options for reducing the load and that flexion in that kind of environment.
Yeah, great. That, just using your hip, it goes back to the basics
Yeah.
on all of these concepts. Keep your back straight, hinge at your hips, think about what you're doing, make sure you keep things close to you. Try to do it in pieces. The diagonal thing helps to unload the pressure so that the pressure is not as much for you to pull to one corner. Um, how about, okay, the dishwasher? We talked a little bit about that. I mentioned it already, but um, using a staggered stance, right? Either, and also moving your feet. That's a really important thing. So if you're going from a sink to the dishwasher and you keep your feet facing the sink, then you're having to do a rotation and a twist of your spine to get that dish into the dishwasher. So make sure that you pick that dish up, move your feet. At least one foot needs to step towards the dishwasher and then place it. So you can kind of do a step over, and then it's a little bit like a golfer's reach because you're holding onto the counter, you're reaching into the dishwasher, you're putting that plate in. That back leg is kind of at the sink back behind you, and one is facing the dishwasher. Okay. And then you can step back, get the next one, turn and rotate. When you're first practicing these techniques, you might have to take an extra few minutes to get things done, right? You might have to think about what you're doing and just do it a little bit slower. Just take your time. There's no rush usually. And I want you to just make sure that you're thinking about your spine, thinking about your hips, thinking about your movements. It's protective. These are things like people say to me all the time, why don't we teach this in high school or something? So that we know how to move to protect our body. It would be great, but think about high school. Nobody cares about this in high school. So anyway, now we're thinking about it because we feel it, we sense it. We know the downsides of not doing it this way. So now we're learning, we're all learning together. We're making some changes, and that's going to be excellent. Okay, let's quickly go over some gardening stuff because at least in California, we do a lot of gardening. Maybe not so much in Wisconsin.
Oh, people
It's
are
starting
big,
to happen now.
They're big into gardening. We just
Are
have a
they?
very small window
Yeah.
of time to do it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Oh no. People love gardening around here. Outside all
Awesome.
day. Yep.
Well, you have plenty of water. You have, sunshine during right now, the spring, right? You're starting to get spring sunshine, I
Uh,
hope.
I wish it was sunshine. It's rainy and cold out here, but hopefully
Okay.
there's sunshine next week.
Okay, good. So in the garden, there's a couple big things about the garden that we want to protect our spine, and it's mostly bending. It's about bending and using tools, right? So if you're going to be using a tool, if it's a little bit longer handle, so you don't have to bend over quite so far, that makes a big difference. Raising the beds, right? Having raised beds, building them up a little bit higher, that takes, thought ahead of time. It's, setting you up for being able to do this for a longer period of time and avoiding any injuries from being too far bent over. And using a staggered stance whenever you need to bend over, using that boxer stance, stride stance, whatever you want to call it, like spread your feet out. Feet are one in front, one in back, and apart from each other. So they're diagonally in a very stable, secure place. So you feel like you have your weight distributed between both legs. So then you can do a really good hip hinge and you can work in front of you. And then the other thing that comes up with, I think, with gardening, and you can tell me this, Kaitlin, like pacing yourself, right? Spreading out tasks. This is what I do because when I'm out trying to weed, but I also have some other things maybe to do up on my orange tree. I need to get some fruit off the orange tree. There's like multiple different levels of things that can happen in the garden, and you might have a multitude of things to do break up the tasks into shorter periods of time, that makes a huge difference. If you're sitting and working on the ground and then you try to stand up from that and you've been there for a half an hour, you are going to feel it in your spine. So you know you've had some excessive loads on there for a while. Just the changing of positions more frequently helps to keep those extra loads down. So it just helps your bones not fatigue. So if you have a force on it, it might be able to handle it for a short period of time. But if you stay there, stay there, stay there, and increase the load, then there might be a change that happens because of that. So if you change often, then it keeps your muscles from getting fatigued. It helps you be more in tune with your position and make sure that your alignment is good. All right, good. Anything else you can think of on?
And just using even just lighter weight tools too. I know you talked about kind of some different ones that are
Great.
longer handled, but lighter weight tools are also very helpful for that.
Oh yeah, shovels are sometimes so heavy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but you can get lighter things. They might be a little smaller, but just lighter material.
Yep.
Okay, great. Um, Dressing, let's just quickly go over like a few things in terms of your daily routine. We have gone over the bathroom quite extensively with our falls routine, right? So making sure that you have grab bars and things that you can, support you. And yeah, I think the bathroom is really about not falling and making sure, oh, getting on and off the toilet too, right? I did have a patient this week who had a fall and has a huge hematoma on his bun, on his buttock. And
Gosh.
he was saying, like, I can't get down to the toilet. I just can't get that low. So we're getting him a raised toilet seat. So when you're having trouble doing the motion of hip hinging, that's what his situation was. But making sure that you're using a hip hinge to get on and off the toilet. It's a great place to practice this. um, and yeah, dressing is another one, getting dressed, right? That's another really common thing we have to do, especially our shoes and socks. That is, if you have a fracture, that is like one of the most difficult things. Slip-on shoes are really becoming popular because
Yeah.
they're so amazing. What an invention that you can just pop that foot in there and it goes in. But still getting your socks on is still a bit of a challenge, and that can be. But if you just think of standing tall with your back, hinging over with your hips as much as possible, you can get a sock on either sitting tall and crossing your leg or leaning over and putting it on your toe and then moving it up. So there's techniques that you can do to try to just keep the same concepts, keep your back as straight as possible, use your hips as much as possible, and your socks maybe not so tight. That's another thing too, right? Really snug, tight socks are harder to get on. They're harder to move up the foot. But if they're a little bit more flexible, there's socks that are made that way so that they don't put a lot of pressure on your ankles if you have swelling. So socks like that can be really helpful. But also just sit down to put on your socks and shoes and pants and underwear and all of those things. Like just sitting down and being tall in your posture might be easier than trying to bend over and keep your balance, all of those things at the same time.
Definitely. And
All
they also
right.
have, sock aids and dressing sticks too. So there's
Absolutely.
other tools if you're having difficulty. There's other tools. A lot of people don't like the sock aid just because it's can be so big, and I like my socks tight, as you know. So it's
Me too.
yeah, there's some tools out there that can help improve, so you don't have to do as much bending and as much reaching to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So those are some
Yeah.
options.
There are adaptive devices for reaching and grabbing down low. Um, so that's another option. So you can always look into that. Um, all right. So we talked about neutral spine. We talked about keeping weight close to you as you're moving. We're just reviewing sort of like the basic concepts, right? Changing your positions frequently to make sure you don't overload yourself sitting too long, flexing forward too long. Use your legs instead of your back, right? And that means a hip hinge. That means using your legs. That means motions coming from your pelvis and your hips instead of from a rotation or a movement of your spine. Take breaks so you don't get fatigued. And also just try to modify the task. Change your equipment, change your position, make sure that you're in a good alignment as you do it. Be aware of your spine. Remember that those square vertebrae in there want to stay square. And so you want to try to just avoid overloading them for any long periods of time. All right. So anything else, Kaitlin, that you wanted to share?
No,
Nuggets of
yeah,
information?
I think we beat it as hard as we could. Neutral spine, hip
Okay,
hinge.
good. Good job, everybody. All right. So just a quick, so in the chat, there is a link for you, and it's a nice little handout about practicing a golfer's reach, a hip hinge, preventative sort of things that you can work on. And it just goes over a lot of nice techniques that are very helpful. I want to remind you that we have our OsteoFit class, which some of these videos that I showed you are there. So you'll have reference, you'll have feedback, you'll have ongoing information from us. Kaitlin and I will be helping you through that process as well. So our OsteoFit class is also a great way to sort of really hone in on the things that make this possible to prevent fracture. And we feel it's just so important. It's a good resource for you guys to try to take to the next step. And if you have any questions, please feel free to join us on our Facebook group and on physioed.com as a resource. And there will be an email coming to you, which will give you any of this information. And the email is always a good way of also getting in touch with us. Our director, Gregory Jones, is going to also answer your questions and get any of those questions to us, the physical therapist, as needed. So we are here for you. We want you to be healthy. Kaitlin, thank you so much for being here from Wisconsin and always being a great partner in helping us change the way we move.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks for having me, Kathy.
All right. Thank you, Kaitlin. Everybody take care. We'll see you next week. We're going to do one more on our sequence. We're going to do nutrition and other things that kind of help build our bone density. Okay. So it's really important. We'll see you then next week, 9 o'clock on Thursday again. Take care.